Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm very glad to have David Chen and Joe Wehbe with us. Today we are going to talk about a fairly new topic compared to what we used to do. But if you've been tracking the type of sessions that we do, we started from all the way in research, then we started talking about engineering, then about products, and the next natural step is to talk about investment. And that's what hopefully the series of sessions going to cover. We are very appreciative of David Chen for making the time to chat with us today, and Joe is going to host this session. For those who are less familiar with us, please go to ai.science and create an account to stay up to date with all our activities and use our platform. And make sure you follow us on, subscribe to our channel on YouTube called ML Explained. With that, I pass it on to Joe to take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Amir, and welcome to our session today. We have a very special guest today. David Chen co-founded AngelVest Group, an investment platform comprising of individual angel investors to curate and invest early-stage companies. AngelVest has grown to be one of the largest angel groups in Greater China. David is an expatriate in China, and the group is mostly comprised of expatriate investors. David is currently in New York, and he's an avid supporter of disruptive innovation and entrepreneurs who have great vision and high levels of consciousness for making large-scale positive social impact. His area of investment focus in recent years includes robotics, AI, blockchain, and other internet businesses. David is the chairman of Harvard Business School Alumni Angels of China. He's worked in a variety of corporate finance and product development roles at companies including Salomon Brothers, Advanced Micro Devices, and Honda Motor. David earns his BS in electrical engineering from University of Rochester and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Originally from New York, David has lived most recently in Shanghai for over 12 years. And like I said, currently spends his time between the US and Asia. Thank you so much, David, for joining us.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Amir. My pleasure.
Great. So, David, keeping in mind our audience today, really, we appreciate your time being here. The title of the session is kind of to get the nuts and bolts of raising funding for a startup. If just to level set for everyone, if you can just maybe explain in your own words, what are the differences between being a angel-backed, raising angel funding versus venture capital?
Yeah, so the backdrop is this. I mean, when people are out to develop technology, make products, that's all great. But I think at some point, if people are going to get serious about launching companies, it's about raising money. And the natural thought is venture capital. And when people think about venture capital, it's essentially people putting risk capital to work, but typically it's larger check sizes. And for a lot of smaller ventures that may not require millions of dollars, I mean, I think it's absolutely fine for companies and teams to get off the ground with, let's say, a couple $100,000. And the angel investment community has been vibrant for over 5 decades, over 50 years by the USA Silicon Valley definition. And a lot of people may miss that point, but I feel that probably the best source of money is probably ones that are closest to you, friends and family. And if you can raise $50,000 to $500,000 to get your idea off the ground in a way that is going to be fair, right? Fair, equitable trade for what you're offering, then that's a great way of getting going. And I think a lot of people, I would encourage for those of you that have, a really compelling idea and you are absolutely 100% in, consider putting your own money in. I mean, bootstrap, right? Take money out of your savings, out of your retirement accounts. Sell your car, and show that you've got skin in the game, that you're completely committed to your idea, and you're willing to kind of bet your own money before betting somebody else's money for the venture. So when you talk about venture capital, it really is more institutionalized money. These are professional investors that will put you through the ringer in terms of due diligence, and the terms may not be that flexible or favorable to the entrepreneur. My suggestion is, if you can raise money from friends and family and angel investors who are friendly to your cause and sympathetic and want to be more value added, then I think that is the way to go, if at all possible.
Great. You touched on a lot of points there, which we're going to unpack, but I wanted to encourage the participants, please submit your questions that you would like David to answer. And Amir, also, please, if you can help us to moderate those questions. So, David, in terms of what you look for when you want to write that angel investor check, maybe what are the top 3 things that you look for?
Well, it's about, since we're addressing a tech group, a lot is about the technology. What in the technology actually works? What is going to work? What do you plan to do with the money to make it work better? The second is the market opportunity, the market size, not necessarily what it is today, but what it can become. But third, and more importantly, and most importantly, I would say, it's the team. It's the people behind the idea, people behind the product, people behind making this product into a massive opportunity in a market that is yet to be seen, let's say. So it's about the vision of the team, but it's also about the execution. People that and maybe it's more than one person. It should be more than one person, in my view. It should be a team of people that can be complementary to each other, that have synergistic skills, that can work well with each other, that have a dream for making something happen that will make a product or service that will be truly value added, and that will bring, hopefully, tremendous benefits to the consumers that end up using that product down the road.
Great. So speaking of team, and maybe this group is a little different than other groups where it's weighted more on the technical side. How important is it to kind of have that mix of the business skills as well as the technical on a co-founding team?
Well, I think initially it's a lot is about the technology. It's about the product definition. But I think as you evolve and as you try to raise outside capital, I think it's really important to think about some of the softer things that you see on management teams, whether it's marketing or finance or things that will help you be more complete in terms of being able to build and run a company. And I've come across scenarios where they're founded all by engineers, and they're wonderful, brilliant scientists, but at the end of the day, to actually take the technology and make it into a viable business, that in itself is also a leap. Right? I used to be a technologist. I used to be an engineer for a large car company, and did my chops in engineering, and then moving to business. It's really a different mindset. It's a shift in mindset, and without that, I think people just get lost in the weeds without looking at the bigger picture in many cases. So I think it's really important to have that full set of people that you want to have on your team to make your company really thrive down the road.
Great. So like you said, you've been cutting your teeth in technology. You're an investor in Hanson Robotics. You took them from to Hong Kong from the US. You're also a former product developer for Honda R&D, and you led AMD's microprocessor technology transfer to China's Ministry of Science and Technology. If you can maybe give some tips in terms of commercializing some of the research that the members of the community are working on, and how can they package that in a business way, since you have both the business and the tech background?
Yeah, I would think about what it is you're trying to achieve in terms of product. I mean, there's this tremendous fascination for artificial intelligence these days, right? Everybody's like AI this, AI that, but from what I'm seeing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, a lot of people put the acronym against the code or against the company, and it's not really AI, it's just software, right? It's just software, and you call it AI, and people, wow, that's pretty amazing, it's AI. But in reality, it's probably not. So I guess the question is, what does it really do? And does it really take large data sets? Does it really take algorithms that can teach themselves down the road? I mean, is it really something that is truly unique and disruptive? And if so, what markets does it disrupt? Where's the value added to that versus just having, software, right? And the key is, can you do something that somebody else hasn't done before in such a way that you can make it to be mainstream, so that many millions of consumers can end up using that product? And then that's where the business model, the thinking about in terms of scaling, becomes really important, because it's more than just about the technology. It's about really having people use the technology in masses, and that's when it becomes truly valuable. And that's when people appreciate that technology down the road.
Great. So when you're thinking about that early check, how do you look at defensibility and kind of maybe the technical due diligence? Like you said, maybe it's not really AI, it's just something in progress and it's down the line. How do you look at that as an angel?
Well, I try to understand as much as I can myself, but within my angel investment group, AngelVest, we've got many people who are trained in various disciplines, including technology, and I always seek advice from other people who may have better answers than I would. So it's about sharing the deal with a syndicate of members who could be interested and getting their opinions. And some of these are corporate guys working in product development or other aspects of technology or other verticals, and that becomes pretty valuable because they're still working in their jobs and they're doing venture capital moonlighting by night, essentially. So in some ways, it's great to kind of pick their brains on some of these opportunities. But I think it really is about establishing something that is truly going to be defensible or is defensible, and you can build upon that, right? If it's something that you have, and a lot of people rely on patents, and patents are great, but I think what's more important than patents is really the team's ability to take whatever IP they have and nurture that further, or to pivot that further if necessary. And that requires a bit of resilience in thinking and execution.
Great. So we've thought about the team and kind of the defensibility. When would you say is the right time to raise capital?
I would say if you have a team together, if you have a vision for a product, ideally you would have some MVP, you have some prototype that is demonstrable, that you can show, that you can say, here's how it works, and here's if you put this as the input, this is the output, kind of thing, and let people imagine what that product could be. If you can show them, it's much more powerful. And one of the important lessons that I had as a young engineer many decades ago at this point, I was doing navigation systems for cars for Honda Motor, and my mentor was the innovator of the airbag product, right, in the 1970s. And when he took that airbag product to corporate executives at Honda Motor, they basically laughed at him and said, "You got to be crazy, a balloon popping out of the steering wheel to save people's lives. I mean, who's ever done that before? Nobody, right?" So it must have been, not realistic. But he persisted. So he was an entrepreneur within a large corporate organization. But because of his conviction, because of his dream, he still went on doing these R&D tests, and eventually he was able to get some funding for the project. The project eventually became a product, and now airbag products are standard in automobiles today, right? Yeah. And his lesson, or his teaching to me is that you can't look at the market for what it is today. You have to look at it for where it will be down the road, whether it's 5 or 10 years later. And at that time, when I was doing navigation systems, the biggest competitor was these paper maps that were selling for $20 a piece. Why would somebody pay $2,000 for a navigation system when you can buy a paper map for $20? That was the argument. And so it took a while to get the navigation product off the ground, but you have now GPS navigation systems in cars. It's an add-on, but certainly, who uses paper maps anymore, honestly, right? So it's a change in behavior. And if you can have a view for what that behavior can be and what that means for the consumer, for the market, and how that will impact the growth of your product or project, then that's an important thing to think about, because a lot of products we see today, in fact, people people can't imagine for what the future would be. They just think, wow, we have iPhones without keypads. How can that possibly be? What happened to my old Motorola flip phone or my Nokia phone with all the keys on it, right? What happened to that, right? So you got to think, what does that mean in terms of the man-machine behavioral aspect of what you're doing in technology that's going to change how we as consumers are going to interface with that technology.
Great. Those are really great points there. So thinking about maybe some of the early stage entrepreneurs on this call, and the definition is always shifting, especially now in this time. Can you kind of give us definition of when the friends and family is to the angel to the pre-seed, seed? What are maybe those number milestones that we should be looking for?
Well, I'm not sure if there's a hard and fast rule to that, Joe, but I think that if you have an idea, if you have a prototype that you've kind of tinkered with, right, in your spare time, if you have a group of folks, guys and gals around the table that can be participatory in that concept, right, then perhaps the next idea is to incorporate, set up a company and see what the company would hold versus what you would hold personally. And what are things that you need to spend money on? For example, do you need to hire outside developers? Do you need to hire outside marketing people? Do you need to hire finance and accounting people? What do you need to do to become a quote unquote company, right, versus a product? And then take some money and get up and running, and then put your thoughts down on paper. Write a business plan. Do a 20-page, 30-page slide deck that's presentable. Really hone your thoughts out, and then find people to pitch, even for academic exercise. Pitch it to people that get feedback, and then you can refine that further. And then when you get to a point where you feel comfortable asking people for money, then be clear about what the ask is. Are you asking for $50,000? Are you asking for $500,000? And if so, then what are the terms? What are you willing to give away? Are you willing to give away equity that's priced, or are you looking to do a convertible note? There are different instruments that are out there that are available, but think through what the ask is, so that when you pitch it and say, hey, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I'm going to create, here's how it's going to impact a large population of society, here's how it's going to be impactful, and here's how you can make money, right? The investors are pretty pragmatic. They've got, they're going to give you 20 minutes at a time, and if you don't capture their attention the first 10, they're gone. They're going to be like on their phone, they're going to be like thinking about something else. So if it's not compelling and you're kind of still like talking about, the physics behind whatever it is that you're doing, 50 minutes later, they're gone, so you got to capture their attention. That's really important. So once you do that, then you're off to the races, right? Then you keep pitching. And for every 10, if you're lucky to get one to write a check, pretty good, actually. So it does require a bit of persistence, I would say. Yeah.
So it's almost, if you can correct me here if I'm wrong, it's almost like showing that this is not just a feature or a product, but you're trying to build an actual business. That's kind of the goal of the pitch.
Yes. And one thing that I wanted to add as well is that show the commitment. I mean, launching a company is not for the faint of heart. I mean, a lot of people have nice, cushy daytime jobs, and they're getting paid by their companies or universities, and that paycheck comes in every month, every 2 weeks, and it's comfortable, right? Now think about when that stops. What happens to your life then?
Sure.
Would that be disrupted? If you stop getting your paycheck, what's going to happen? You're going to be able to pay the rent, feed your kids, whatever it may be, right?
Sure.
And you got to think through: are you completely committed to this idea, this venture? And what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to give up to make it happen? Right. That's why it's always good to have a bit of a cushion. If you have some savings and you say, I'm ready to go full time, and do you have enough cash to keep yourself going for a period of time? Let's say 6 months or 12 months, right? And definitely, investors want to see that you're completely committed. I mean, for me as an investor, if you say, I'm going to keep my day job, my corporate job, and still do this on the weekends, well, look, you're not committed. Why should you be playing with my money where you're not going to take a bet on yourself? So that's really important, and people should really think through the life implications of starting a company.
Yeah, and I think AISC and Amir and his co-founder, so they quit their job and took this on full time. So that's great to hear in terms of that commitment side. Now, what about kind of that strategic partner, that smart money versus just raising capital from anyone? How is your view on that, especially being something highly technical?
Well, cash is a commodity these days. I mean, cash is out there. The question is whether you can find somebody to give it to you for the right reason. But I think what's more meaningful, if you can raise money from investors who are willing to help, people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and spend time, open up their network, help you as a company get up the curve. You may be the AI guru, but what about partners? I mean, what about partnering with certain potential customers in retail or e-commerce or whatever it may be, whatever vertical you're focused on, and find investors who are willing to, well, yes, give you some money, but also give you their time and open up their network to help you meet the right people, so you can actually get in there and do a couple deals. If you can do a couple of business development deals, sign them, that counts for a lot, right? If you have a deal with a major, pick your favorite large company, Walmart or Amazon, whatever, right? You sign a deal with one of those guys and you go to the next round to raise money, that gives you far more, much more credibility. So, and investors early on, angel investors are ones that are maybe in a position to help you. So if you can raise money from people who have more than just money, then that's the way to go, I would say.
And what would be your advice in terms of packaging it for a Walmart or an Amazon? And is it doing a POC, or how would somebody package something like that?
Well, if you're trying to do a deal with a large corporate, you got to think about what you have and what they don't have and why they may need that, right? It's a very logical kind of thought process, and then you got to find the right people who will give you the audience. The problem with business-to-business sales, B2B sales, is that it's very bureaucratic. People in these large companies are, whether they're investors or buying agents, they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to make take a bet, take a risk on a small company. It really, they put you through the ringer typically, right? And it takes a long time to do a B2B sale and or raise money from corporate VCs. But I think you got to think strategically about why you can be truly different and why they can't do it themselves, or why they can't get that from another vendor. There are a lot of people out doing possibly what you're doing, and the question is, how are you going to be different? So that begs the question, how do you get to some level of traction? It's got to be more than just an MVP. It's got to be something that actually works when you get to that level and pitch to a large corporate, probably.
Great. Amir, please, if we're getting any questions, let me know. I haven't seen any so far. So
I can actually ask a few myself.
Sure, go ahead. Sure, go ahead.
So a lot of what you're saying, David, makes a lot of sense, and that's the sort of feedback that we've been getting from investors ourselves. One thing that I like, I'm a technical founder, and I'm learning the business side as I'm going. As you said, that's an important part that we have to deal with. One of the important things that I most struggle with is that a lot of people that I'm talking to expect me to simultaneously draw this massive grand vision that this is going to be revolutionary, etc., right? But at the same time, demonstrate extreme concreteness about what I'm trying to do, which to me, as a scientist, as a technologist, sounds very contradictory. So if it is a grand vision that is going to revolutionize, I most probably don't know how it's going to happen. But at the same time, I should demonstrate that I know exactly how it's going to happen. So can you talk to that a bit to see, like, what is the mindset behind? I'm sure this is like a superficial way that I'm describing it. So I'm interested to know, what is the investor's mindset behind looking for information like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is really about two very important pieces of any startup company that would either mean success or a failure. And the first question about the big vision and how big it's going to be. From an investor's perspective, if it's not going to be big, why bother, right? If you're not going to recreate the next thing, the next iPhone or whatever you want to call it, next product that's going to be like a killer category and sell millions of units and impact millions of people and make millions of dollars, billions of dollars actually, then why bother? But the second part of the question is about really execution, right? You can have a great dream, but if you don't have any thoughts of how to make it happen, then it's just not going to happen, right? And that's why I think they're not separate questions. They're actually questions that relate to the investability of your venture. And if you have somebody who can actually get into the nuts and somebody who can actually run the day-to-day and really help you with product definition and do the day-to-day operation, then that's a guy who can complement you if you're a big picture guy, right? If you're more of the nuts and bolts kind of guy, then you need to find somebody that can help you articulate that big vision. So whatever it is that you're doing can become truly big, truly massive, right? And investors want to see that you have that big pie in the sky aspiration to go for, but also feet on the ground, so that you know that when you walk day to day, that you have a path to get there. So it may not be the same person; it could be different people playing different roles to satisfy the answers to those questions.
Mhm.
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense, and to a large extent, sort of what I'm learning slowly over time. One of the interesting points that you mentioned previously, and I guess an important part of the same narrative, that you have to demonstrate something that is big enough to be investable, but then at the same time, you're the person who knows how to execute it. A big part of execution, and I guess related to the previous question, is the fact that we both know that what I'm trying to say as what's going to happen is probably going to be wrong. But what is important probably for you as the investor is, is this the person who will learn and pivot to the right thing after that failure, right? So that's part of the point that you made earlier as well. And I guess what I'm curious to know is, what are some of the good ways for the founders to demonstrate their ability to learn and pivot?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about bringing people on board, other people on board who truly can complement the founding team, the founder or the founding team, and really the ability to work in a way that that demonstrates that the founder may fully admit that he or she may not have all the answers, which is true, right? And it boils down to character and personality. And if you find somebody as an investor that is really gung-ho about being right all the time, then to me, that person may not be investable, right? Because we're all wrong at some point in our lives. And the question is whether we're big enough to admit that and find ways to improve upon that, right? So I think for a team, it really is about finding the right people that can complement where you want to improve, where your weaknesses are, essentially. And if you can demonstrate that to an investor who understands that, and having the character of an entrepreneur, it's a bit tricky, right? I mean, you want to be out there gregarious and confident, but on the other side of the coin, you want to be humble, and you want to show that you can learn, you can actually grow as a founder, as an executive of this company, if you're going to be a CEO. And that's what I think investors are looking for, that you can grow with this venture. It's pretty important, I think.
David, maybe if you can give a definition of, in terms of valuation. So when we talk about unicorn, is it 100 million in revenue? Just to kind of set some context. And I actually forget the term before, what they're calling it now, before unicorn and decacorn and all the rest. So if you can get that definition of unicorn and in terms of sales and valuation.
Well, I mean, the traditional definition of unicorn is $1 billion in valuation, right? In terms of revenues, it's across the board depending on the sector that you're in, and depends on whether in my view at least, whether unicorn is a paper unicorn or it's truly a liquidity event, whether it's an IPO. And you see a lot of paper unicorns out there, certainly, and if you think about valuation itself, what is it? It's really supply and demand. The fact that there's limited supply of equity of this company, and you have demand for it, right? So in some sense, if you do a great job of marketing that and the demand increases, and with limited supply, then the valuation goes up, right? So I think in terms of financial metrics, whether it's revenues and or profitability, I'm not sure if there's one benchmark that we look at that defines what $1 billion valuation commands, actually.
Okay. Now, what happens after you get funded in terms of governance? You get that angel check. How hands-on is this angel? With the venture. How do you look at that?
Well, for us, if we are the lead investor, we typically ask for a board seat. If we're just a follower, if we're a follower, amongst several in the syndicate, then we'll just follow. That's fine. And irregardless, we like to help. Our network is here to help. And if the founders call us, hey, we need to find this particular person in whatever sector, I think our people do a pretty good job of at least trying to connect the dots. And in terms of governance, I mean, certainly companies should have a good board to really think critically about the growing pains, the growth issues of any company, and whether it's to help and or criticize, when necessary. And that's important, actually. So that's the role that we want to play in order for us to maintain our shareholder value for the company.
Okay, great. And you mentioned board. In terms of building your early board of advisors, what is your recommendation, kind of getting those folks and giving them equity as you're raising funding?
Yeah, I would suggest that even before you raise any money and you have an idea, and find a couple of people that are sympathetic to your cause, and bring them on board as your, as a board of advisor person. No strings attached, no liabilities, but give them some, some upside. Give them something for their time, because what I've noticed is that if you ask people to kind of do it for free or volunteer, it doesn't really last very long, unfortunately. So you probably want to show them that you're committed to your venture, number one, but secondly, that you're committed to them for being able to help you. And there's no one size fit all kind of formula for what you give out. There's some benchmarks that are out there, but I would say there's some things that you can do that you want to incentivize them to make sure that if they're part of the ride, that down the road that they'll be made whole for it, basically.
Great. And given the current environment, are you investing in this current atmosphere? Are you actively investing? And maybe what do you look for? Like, what gets you excited?
Yeah, we're still looking, and we're still looking for the right deals. I think what gets me interested is cross-border opportunities. Essentially, the world has become smaller in that regard. I mean, we're having calls across borders, we're having deals across borders, and the question is, can I help? Can I help a company that is in a market that doesn't have a very large market size in a market that has a larger market size, i.e. China, i.e. the United States, right? So I get approached by a lot of companies from smaller footprint countries, whether it's Estonia or South Korea or Japan or Australia, and say, hey, we'd love to get into China. How can we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the best way to do that is to find people who are aligned with your cause. And if they put in money, then they're aligned. They're aligned to help you succeed. And then if they're aligned, then they'll help you. They'll help you open up doors in those particular markets. So our goal is to help. Our goal is to see what we can do for our portfolio companies to achieve faster growth.
Great. Amir, please, if there's any questions, feel free to interrupt.
Yep, there's actually one.
Okay.
I'm going to slightly rephrase and generalize the question that Moja is asking. So thinking about more deep tech kind of companies, like companies that are trying to use, ideas closer to the cutting edge of where the research and technology is, to build a venture, to build a product, which means that they need a lot more money and they're a lot more risky upfront. So what's the right approach for founders that are trying to build in those environments?
Give me some more context to that. So would it be, let's say, research out of a university environment, or, I mean, when you talk about deep tech, I mean, there are various forms of deep tech, right? But I guess, yeah, can you be more specific about that?
For example, I guess a hardware product, right? So if it is a very, innovative hardware product that doesn't have a lot of previous track record, and there's not a huge supply chain that you can easily source a lot of the parts of what you're trying to build. So you need significant amount of money upfront to be able to even prototype this, to even be able to have an MVP that you can show anyone.
Yeah, right. So the question is, how much is really going to be the right number to kind of get something off the ground? And I know a lot of investors don't like capital intensive kind of business models, right? So if it is hardware capital intensive dependent, then the question is, what are the economics behind that? If it's going to require a lot of money just to kind of build a prototype, then you have to think carefully, um, what is the business model going to look like? Because if it's based on manufacturability of that product, well, cost goes down as a result of scale and volume, right? We all know that. But how do you project that? And one way that I can suggest is that Excel is actually a pretty wonderful tool. I mean, you can actually kind of model things out, right, based on assumptions, and then translate that into financial numbers, revenues and costs, etc. And I would, get somewhat adept on Excel, so you can actually model out certain scenarios. So if your first prototype is going to cost you $1 million, let's say, right, but in mass production, that product ends up being $100,000 or $10, whatever it ends up being. And the question is, is $1 million for the first prototype the right number? Could you get it for lower? And you'd have to find the right investor that would say, hey, I want to invest $1 million into your prototype as an experiment, and if it goes great, fine. If it dies, well, that's fine too. I don't think you find a whole lot of those kind of people out there, unfortunately, unless they're, again, friends and family, that believe in you as a person. So I would suggest, if at all possible, find the lowest cost way to get up and running, so you can demonstrate that this is actually going to work. And then with the Excel exercise, think through what the scale is going to be. Let's say you end up making 10 of those for $100,000. Is that interesting? Or would it be better to sell 1 million of those for $20,000, right? So you can run the numbers and figure out, what the business model is going to be. And if it doesn't scale, if it can't scale because you're only selling 10 units per year at whatever, $50,000, $100,000, that's not really interesting. Right? If that's kind of going to be the end goal, in terms of what scale looks like, well, that truly is not interesting for most investors. So you got to think through, ultimately, let's say 3 to 5 years later, what your business model is going to look like. And if you can't have a vision for that for yourself, then you're not going to be able to convince investors of the same, obviously. So that's a worthy exercise of doing, I believe.
Definitely. An interesting thing that I heard on a podcast once about this topic was about this company that was trying to build this super expensive supersonic jets. And in order to prove to investors that people really want something like this, they went through this whole iteration and de-risking the situation for the investor, as you say. But an interesting thing they did was just 3D printed a lot of the different components and took these to potential clients, and eventually got a bunch of traction from those that then they could use to build up the business model, as you're suggesting, which is quite an interesting approach to deal with problems like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yes.
Great. So, David, while the whole world pivots, startups and entrepreneurs were trying to find new ways to protect our customers, our pipeline, stay top of mind with our community and what we're building. What is your advice in terms of trying to reach out to investors during this time and kind of maybe pitching on Zoom and such? What is your advice for that?
Well, reach out. I mean, I think even within your group, you probably know a ton of investors. Use LinkedIn, right? Do cold calls and look at syndicate groups. Look at the Harvard Business School Alumni Angels. I mean, even within that group, you have many angel investors around the world that will be happy to at least take a phone call, right? So I think there are people out there. It's just a matter of finding the right folks, right investors that are still active in this market. And I will say, the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic is has caused, in some ways, distress for some folks, but in other ways, it's created tremendous opportunities. I mean, the fact that now we're doing all these meetings on video or Zoom, and people are doing deals on Zoom, whereas before it had to be face to face. Got to shake people's hands and all these kind of things, and the mode of behavior, person to person behavior, has definitely changed because of the pandemic. But that doesn't mean that we can't reinvent and find new ways of getting business done.
Great. Maybe a couple of things I wanted to touch on, maybe on the business side, in terms of kind of your secret sauce or your moats. Maybe if you can kind of touch upon like network effects or business model innovation. Is it things like that where so that it's not just the tech that's being replicated, but in terms you have some other moat?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you can think beyond the technology and think about what that non-tech moat ends up being, that's also very valuable. And I think that, I mean, take countries, for example. I mean, I lived in China for a while, and I remember back 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the products that are coming out of China were just copycat products, right? They were just copied best in best in market, and make a replica of that, and even kind of use the same logo in some regards. So obviously it was IP infringement, but as a result of doing that over and over again, the engineers there were able to innovate, and actually you see some of the products that are coming out now. The innovation, it's not really is not just about the technology innovation; it's about the business model innovation, right? Because the consumer market behaves very differently in that market than that of North America. And the question is whether you can take a product and look at it that differently in the lens of a different market. And if so, then maybe the business model ends up being very different, right? And if you can do that, and then you can get some traction and then scale, right? Then actually, scale itself and traction become a moat. It becomes a non-technology moat. But nonetheless, if you have that traction from a customer viewpoint, from a branding viewpoint, even, right? Then that you become highly defensible relative to your competitors.
Great. So I wanted to spend maybe the last 15 minutes here with you talking more about the people side. So keeping in mind the AISC community, there's various stream owners. So you have folks in charge of computer vision, recommender systems, quantum computing. What is your advice in terms of harnessing the power of the community and using the community as a competitive advantage, and kind of coming together these various stream owners and community to kind of build something? What is your advice there?
Well, I think community is very important, and I think the extent that people can be open about their ideas, their aspirations, then new ideas would emerge that you wouldn't have foreseen otherwise. It's kind of like the 1 + 1 = 3 effect. You get 3 people or 10 people in a room, and you're kind of brainstorming about possibilities. New ideas, not just the technology, but the market and the business model ideas will emerge from that you would not have foreseen in a smaller group or individually. And that's what I would encourage, that kind of community connectivity with people from different disciplines. I think you'll have some wonderful things emerge from that. So even for me, anecdotally, in the last 2 months, I put together a group. I call it the Mastermind Group, and these are people that are thinking differently about the paradigm shifts that we see in the year 2020. I mean, as a result of COVID-19, as a result of the increased awareness in consciousness and meditation, and how we could take that in the realm of technology. How can technology play a role in helping us as human beings deal with the issues of pandemic, of economic turmoil, of racial disparity that we see in the world today, political turmoil as well. I mean, how can we deal with that, right? So I find that as a group getting together, some wonderful ideas come out of that. And some of those ideas actually become actionable. And when they become actionable, then you can actually move them further and make them into entities and or companies that become something that could be valuable at some point in time.
Great. So in terms of like tactically executing that, so that's great, a mastermind group. Would you recommend a hackathon, or is it more sort of like a pitch to match where, folks are pitching and matching them with others? How would you say the community can go about that?
Well, those are all great ideas. I mean, yes,
Mm.
if you can organize a hackathon and doesn't cost a whole lot of time and money, and people are willing to show up for it, then absolutely. I mean, it really is. It's just people's desire and intent to do something like that, and getting other people to buy into it and to be part of it, even at a cursory level. And people come, if you do a hackathon day and runs 8 hours, have somebody, pick a couple companies that are willing to participate then and see what happens. And I bet you. You do that a couple times, you'll have some takeaways that are going to be good learnings for the group.
Great. Maybe some corporate sponsors to sponsor. There's an idea, Amir. Some corporate sponsors for a hackathon. So in terms of the people side, what would you say is the single most important characteristic you look for in an entrepreneur trying to raise that early seed? Like to say, okay, I just love this team or this entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's really about the team. It is that clarity of purpose, I would say. Purpose before vision, and then vision, right? And then ideally having had done something in that realm before, they're going to do this new venture, right? Some anecdotes of success and failure and what they learned from that failure. And just a straight shooter, no BS, right? Tell it to me as it is, utmost integrity and character, right? And it's okay to have a couple of blemishes on your resume as long as you're open about it and what you've learned from it, and then that's all good, actually, right? So
great. We wanted to kind of skip this question earlier. So once you raise that funding, how do you keep the company funded? What are some things to kind of keep in mind in terms of metrics or to show to the investors?
Yeah, companies always need cash. That's part of the problem, So,
yeah.
You can either get cash by raising more money. So fundraising is always an ongoing exercise for many companies. I would say a better way of doing it is get to revenue and cash flow positive as soon as you can, right? Get it from your customers, start selling stuff, and make yourself profitable so you don't rely on more investors coming into onto the cap table. So it's all about delivery of milestones. So you have a vision, then you have a strategy, then you have an operational roadmap, let's say, and then you set milestones every quarter or every certain few months. You have a deliverable that you hope to deliver upon, not just to yourselves, but to your investors, your shareholders, to your consumers, your customers, possibly. And the question is whether you can hit those milestones, whether you can hit those targets. And if you do, right, if you have a plan and 6 months later, 9 months later, you're there and say, hey, I hit my milestones, and you go out and raise the next round. You go to VC, you go Series A, Series B, Series C, and you keep going, right? If you have the luxury of being able to sell things, because you don't need to raise more money, even better, then scale. Try to, if you can sell 10 widgets, why can't you sell 10,000 or 10 million widgets, right? See what you need to do to get to that kind of scale. So funding is always very important, but there are different ways of achieving it. And I think a lot of reason why companies run out of cash and then they die is because they don't keep their eye on the ball on how to keep money in the bank, actually.
Great. All really great advice. Amir, are we missing any questions in the chat? Do you have any questions?
I do have a question about the last one. So there is always a balance between how much money do you want to make yourself to grow versus growing more aggressively with investor money. And again, like from what I'm recently learning is that investors want me to be more aggressive, like raise more money, build faster, grow faster, versus, become cash positive and grow slower. How do you think about getting the right balance between the two? Because obviously, again, like contradictory ends, and there is definitely must be some sort of balance between the two.
Yeah, I think as I think through the your question, I mean, that is a typical polarity that you see between investors and entrepreneurs. And investors want to make sure that you have enough cash to kind of weather the storm. But it really is up to it boils down to your plan, right? I mean, and if you only need like $1 million hypothetically for the next 12 months, it wouldn't make sense to raise like 25 million, right? I mean, that's just overkill. And unless people are just kind of giving you money left and right on the right terms, you shouldn't take it. You shouldn't raise money. I think the problem with entrepreneurs is that a lot of people say, hey, this person's going to give me more money, so I'll take it. That may not be the right answer, right? The question is, what are you going to do with that money? I typically like to see enough runway for, let's say, 18 to 24 months before I raise the next round. So it's the right balance between how much money I can raise versus the fear of running out of money, right? And making sure that whatever money I raise, that I've got a plan for that money versus just having it sit in the savings account somewhere. And then make sure that when you get that money, that you move aggressively, if at all possible, to kind of move that so they can grow. That's what investors want to see. And if they're saying they want to give you more money, like twice or 3 times more, because they feel you can grow that much faster, you got to ask yourself, can you and your team execute that? Does more money mean faster execution? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. And if the answer is, well, if I got like an extra 0 in my bank account, does that mean I can, move this faster? And if the answer is no, then you should really think about taking that money, actually, right? It's a balance. It's a judgment, actually. So that's why we bet on the management team. Is the management team going to be savvy enough to make that call, right? And hopefully with the guidance of investors, the right investors that can help guide you to that decision.
Great. So maybe almost the last question is kind of on ecosystem building. So when you moved to China, you're, if I'm correct, one of the first angel groups there, and you kind of wanted to bring, that Silicon Valley, that US type of angel investing to China. How would you say, in terms of building ecosystem in Toronto and Canada, some of your advice? Myself, being an American in Canada, I look at it kind of, early stage investors want to invest in the execution based risk, and entrepreneurship, it's not a binary risk because there's so many factors, but that early check, sometimes it's hard. So what is your advice maybe in terms of ecosystem building for early stage capital to kind of encourage entrepreneurship?
Well, it starts from your local community. I mean, if you have people in Toronto that are kind of see how it can be done, that are fond of you guys and of what you're doing, your projects, etc., that's the first step. But I think the communication travel has become so ubiquitous that you don't need to stop in Toronto. You can go to New York, you can go to Silicon Valley, you can go to other places where there are early stage investors that are sympathetic, and those investors, if you can find them, typically would be open to finding the right deal, irrespective of the location, right? Certainly for me, we're looking global. I mean, I get deals from Europe, from Australia, from everywhere, and it all boils down to whether I've got faith in the team, and more importantly, if I'm investing in a company that's kind of outside my geographic domain, who can I partner up with there? Who can I work with there locally that could be my eyes and ears for that particular company? Like if I do a deal, in Boston, like we did a couple of years ago for a Series C deal, right? It was a later stage deal, but we knew the founder, and we had faith that even though we weren't in Boston, that we could actually do that deal, right? Or we did a deal in Switzerland, actually. Now, their operations were in Shanghai, but their headquarters are in Switzerland. So ideally, if you can find an investor group in Toronto that's credible, that will say to you, hey, guys, we'll write you part of the check, but not all of it. Then you go out and you find another group. You can go to, for example, the HBS Alumni Angels and say, hey, we have an investor locally, maybe a lead investor in Toronto, but we're missing, a third of the round. Would you guys consider? And assuming that this outside group can work with a local investor group in Toronto, then that's how you would attract outside capital that you may not have locally in your geographic market, actually.
Great. That counterpart funding is really, really important to kind of show someone else has already maybe done their due diligence or sees the potential there. So great advice there. Amir, are there any questions before we close off?
No, so you're good.
Okay. David, really thank you so much for your time. It was very, very insightful. And is there any particular call to action that you would like to ask from the community, or something you would like to share? I don't know if you're active on Twitter or where we can follow some of your work.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, and part of the reason, Joe, why I was really interested in doing this today with your group in Toronto is because you know, I do have an affinity for deep tech, and I'm looking at AI. I'm looking at computer science as you know, a burgeoning field. It's going to be massive, obviously. And the question is, you know, who in your community there really have some really interesting technologies and future products that that I can get involved with? I'd love to kind of have more of a conversation with your community, be part of your community, actually, even though I'm not in Toronto physically. But that's how communities get are getting spawned. It's not just about your local geography, but community, in my mind, is that if you know somebody in New York or California or China or London, I mean, these are people that are part of your community, and that also is the value proposition of Harvard Business School Alumni Angels. That, you know, we're community. We're not physically in the same location, but it's the affinity to that particular school that gives us that affinity to that community, actually. So similarly here, you have a community of great, you know, engineering minds probably, and the question is, how can you expand that so that you can complement the technology piece of it with other aspects that could help your community build great companies? You know, if I could play a role in that, that could be interesting. I'm thinking.
Awesome. Really, thank you so much. Well, you're our first investor guest, and I think you've raised the bar so high for everyone else. So thank you so much, and you're welcome to join the community anytime. Really great events. And everyone, please follow the YouTube channel and LinkedIn to keep up to date. Amir, any closing words?
No, as Joe said, David, thank you so much for making the time to do this. Really appreciate it, and I would love to have you on our Slack channel, and we would love to be your, I guess, ears and eyes in our community, and you know, stay in touch with you definitely. And for the audience, thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure you go to AI.science to create an account to stay up to date, and follow ML. Not papers anymore. ML Explained on YouTube. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.